Sometimes it's beneficial, or maybe even necessary, to look back on the phases of our spiritual life and perhaps recognize that not only do we not need to go back there, but in fact we can't go back there. There are 3 stories, without making this a storytelling marathon, that define these way stations for us. Let's see if you can recognize what they are from the stories. The first is that story about the wandering dervish who came in his travels across a black bag that he put over his shoulders, and which he found that he could pop anything in and it would disappear. So, he met some priests and others along the way who argued about him, about the way things were and should be. So he would just pop them in his bag and they would go. And then, of course, more and more he found in the world people who were practicing injustice and living badly. And so he began to put all these people in his bag and they just disappeared. So, of course, after a while, there was nobody left around except a lot of demons. And they were a bit harder because they kept inflating his bag all the time. So he had to take his bag to a silversmith so that he could get out his big hammer to hammer the bag down so that the demons also would disappear. But he lived his life, and finally the end came. But instead of going up to the celestial realms as he expected, he felt himself spiraling down into the fiery furnaces, and there he was at the gates of hell. And when the demon said, come in, we've been waiting for you, you only saw evil in the world, so you belong in here. And of course, the dervish begged to differ, and he said, well, you're not taking me in there, and immediately put hell into his black bag and it disappeared. So then, of course, there was nowhere else to go but up to the heavenly realms, and he found himself at the pearly gates, and St. Peter there said, no, you don't belong in here, you belong down there because of all that you saw in the world. And the dervish said, well, if you don't let me in, I'll just put you into my black bag and make you disappear. And then there's a story about the Buddhist layman, and he was with a Buddhist teacher for many, many years, and he learned the sutras and the tenets of Buddhism, and he was particularly taken with the Diamond Sutra, and he would go around wherever he was, and he would be sprouting and quoting the Diamond Sutra to people, and he would tell people that he'd come to live that saying, samsara is nirvana. But the only trouble about this fellow was that he was addicted to liquor, and he could be seen in the tavern every night, swilling down his alcohol. Not only that, he also was addicted to cavorting with the ladies of the night, and could often be seen staggering down the road in the morning after visiting one brothel or another. So this came to the ears of the Buddhist master, so he called this fellow into his presence, and he admonished him severely about his lifestyle. But the layman argued with him, well, I'm only living, that samsara is nirvana, that life and all that life contains is bliss. And so after some debate went on, the Buddhist master said, well let's not bother about arguing about that anymore. But he said, I know that you're a connoisseur of fine wines, and it so happens that although we don't drink in this establishment, that we've been given this bottle of very, very fine wine. Would you like to taste it? Oh, said the layman, not ever wanting to refuse a good drop. So the Buddhist master called his attendant to him and whispered in his ear. And then as the attendant was walking away, the Buddhist master said, now make sure it's clean now. And after a while, the attendant came out holding the fine bottle of wine in one hand and a chamber pot in the other. And he was pouring the wine into the chamber pot. And the Buddhist master said, no, now it's clean. But try as he might, the Buddhist layman could not bring that chamber pot to his lips, even though he knew it had this very fine wine inside. And so, with some embarrassment, he said to the Buddhist man, well, what are you trying to teach me here? And the Buddhist master said, well, it's no doubt that you are giving out the purity of truth, but it's being served in a vessel which has connotations of decadence and depravity. And so, of course, we realize that the Buddhist layman recognized what it was that the Buddhist master was illuminating for him. The last story is about that Hindu man following the Hindu tenets, who was with his guru from his youth, learning the ways of yoga and the ways of his faith. One day, his guru called him to him and he said, my son, you are now ready for the final initiation. And the student, remembering what it was that was said about this state of final liberation or annihilation, and it was that you rent your garments and you went off to the mountains, or you became a wandering sadhu. And he said, but oh Master, I truly and dearly want to attain this ultimate initiation, but I have a wife and family, I have children, I have a mother and father, I have a mother-in-law and father-in-law, and they love me and care for me, and I'm responsible for them. So I cannot accept your initiation. And the Master said, fine, but before you go, take this little vial with you. And he gave him a little vial containing some fluid, and he said, just imbibe this when you go back to your house. So when he got back to his house, following his guru's instructions, he drank down the contents of the vial, and suddenly his body went into an extreme yogic pose, arms and legs spread-eagled, and immediately went into what one might call a catatonic state. Now, he was as though dead. So when his wife came out and saw him there and felt for his pulse and looked for his breath, he appeared to all intents and purposes to be dead. So she began to weep and wail and call the neighbors, and they all came over and verified, yes, he was dead. But of course the Hindu custom is, the first thing you do with a dead body is you take it to the threshold of the house and you bathe it with milk. But they couldn't get him out of the door. So someone said, we'll go get an axe, we'll have to chop down the doorways, we'll have to chop down that wall to get him out. And all of a sudden, the wife went silent. She stopped her weeping and wailing, as did the members of the family. And they all had a little conferring together, and then the wife said, this is our house. This is where we live. We have to continue to live here. Chop off his arms and his legs. So of course, just at that moment, he came out of his catatonic state, quietly left the house and went to his guru, and you can imagine what he said. Bring on the initiation. So when we look at these three way stations of our spiritual journey, can you recognize from these stories what they were? Could it be that the first one is that we came to this place where we could no longer judge between right and wrong, good and evil, freeing us from the vacillations? And what about this second story? That we find that we have no need to preach or proselytize. We have nothing to prove. And pop goes our spiritual ego. And then this third story. What is it telling us about the way station? That we no longer have expectations of or responsibility to anybody or anything. Could it be that these three stories indicate these way stations to which we cannot go back to now? We cannot go back to being judgmental. We find ourselves, when we're sitting on our high horse and wanting to, something shuts our lips. Or when we feel drawn to go back to being the do-gooder or whatever, that we recognize we don't need to take any responsibility. Everybody's got themselves, their own power, what they need. What do you say about this? What's your thought? Do you agree with these stations that we've been at? Can we recognize that not only do we not need to go back there, but we can't go back there? But if that's the case, where the hell are we?
Acceptance and allowance.
Thank you.